Welcome to the Uncharted podcast. I am your host, Inés Franklin. My hope for you today is that we discover faith beyond the boundaries. Uncharted is intended to be a safe place for you to listen, learn, and challenge yourself along your journey of faith. May grace and peace be with you today. Welcome to the show. Hello, friends. Well, one of the hard parts about the journey of faith is that it's not always wonderful and good and high and exciting. There are some challenges on the journey of faith, and one of them is that we could all experience some level of pain, maybe some rejection, maybe some trauma, and certainly some wounds. And those wounds can come from people in the community, people in our church. It could come from a trusted friend, someone in our life group, someone we thought loved us, and maybe they still do, but out of their own brokenness, harmed us. And, those are times when we will ask questions like, God, where are you? Why is this happening? Why did you let it happen to me? How can you allow this? We might question ourselves. Are we something wrong with us that we maybe deserve this? Are we that terrible of a sinner and God has sort of let us be? Or we might question, of course, others and have a distrust for other people. And how do we recover from those moments? It's very disorienting at times. And so I am grateful that we're having a conversation today about this topic. And we're having it with Drew Tilton, who is the chief editor of Trochia Ministries and my ministry at inesfranklin.com. And what you will see is that Drew shares very vulnerably from his own experience of abuse and how that affected his journey of faith and how his walk with Jesus was affected by all that. So I pray that you will be encouraged by him. Frankly, as we began our podcast conversation, we weren't thinking this was going to go so deep, but like the Spirit leads, we went along. We thought, you know what, this is something people need to hear. This is something that might help someone out there who, maybe you, who might be dealing with abuse or have dealt with abuse, and you are either healing or need healing. And I pray this is very encouraging to you. Let me tell you about Drew. Drew is a writer and an editor and an author coach. He specializes in supporting Christian writers through the theological and developmental lens, which is wonderful. He did that for me in my book, and it was invaluable. He made my book better, for sure. He also is a former pastor. He and I served together at Mariners Church. As you can see, as he talks about it, he was the youth pastor while I was serving as the chapel pastor. I'd forgotten about that. He calls me on that. But yes, I knew we worked together. I'd forgotten that he was in the children's ministry, but he reminded me today. And also Drew has his own freelance editing and author coaching business called ACO Creative, where he serves other writers, helping them write and publish quality books that make a difference in people's lives. Wonderful. And Drew and his wife, Marissa, they live now in Chicago. They love camping, board games, and reading books. I think you really will enjoy this conversation. And again, I pray that it blesses you. Before we start, I want to just remind you, we love to hear from you. Your comments, your questions, your suggestions on topics that you want to cover. If you're reading Uncharted and there's something that resonated with you that you want us to cover even further, I would love to do that. So we just want to hear from you. Send us an email at hello@inesfranklin.com. And we look at every single one of those emails, and we can't wait to hear from you. All right, let's listen into my conversation with Drew. May it bless you. Well, Drew, thank you for being with us today. I love working with you, by the way. I am so grateful. I know we worked together in, kind of in distance at Mariners when I was the chapel pastor and you were in the communications team, right?
I was on the youth team.
The youth team. But didn't you do communications for them as well?
No, never did communications.
I'm way off. But I know we were at the church together.
As a youth pastor, you kind of do a little bit of everything. So yeah, sure. I did comm. I sent out a lot of comm.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, and then being reconnected when I was working on my ministry and working on my book, and it's been
Yeah.
such a joy to
Yeah.
walk this journey with you. So thank you for being with
Totally.
us
No,
today.
it's been a lot of fun for me too. It's been cool to reconnect and see what you're up to and get to join in with what you're up to and what God's doing through you and through Trochia and through your book. And yeah, really
Awesome,
excited and excited to get to be a guest on the podcast.
sweet.
I like talking. So,
I love it. Okay, so as you know, I love that on Uncharted, we get to tell our stories and we get to share
mm-hmm.
with others so that they can see all of our stories are unique and there is no one cookie cutter. God is so
Yeah.
amazing and that He walks with us as individuals on our journey of faith. And so I want my audience to hear a little bit of your story if you don't mind sharing with us, your journey of faith, what that looked like.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it's been a second since I've done the testimony thing, but I'll try not to make it too much
No,
testimonial
yeah, exactly.
I'll try to make it a bit more natural. But yeah, I was born in Southern California. My mom and dad got divorced when I was like 2 months old. So like super baby.
Mm,
I don't remember them ever being together. Certainly impacted my life and my childhood, but not because of the divorce itself, but because of having parents growing up with parents that were divorced.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that was a lot of my early childhood. Lived with my mom mostly, was with my dad most weekends early on. Later that would change, but yeah, I think my team felt like me, my older brother Adam, and my mom, and we were just this tight knit group, and nothing could mess us up or separate us or anything. And a lot of that changed though when my mom got remarried when I was 7 years old. And that was really, really hard for me, pretty traumatic for me in a lot of ways. And for various reasons, but my house went from me feeling very safe with my mom and brother to introducing not only a stepdad, but two other stepbrothers. I also we ended up being a home where I experienced abuse,
Mm.
in a lot of ways, which I won't go into detail here on the podcast, but it was just a really, really awful, trying time for me. And though my
How old were
mom,
you when that happened?
I was 7 when my mom got remarried, and then went into that home, and I mean I was there all the way through high school. So,
Mm.
and the abuse was recurring and
Mm.
something that was really hard. And then, um, yeah, I think there was a lot of even in the worst childhood situations, there's a lot of fun from my childhood. There's a lot of things that I look back on and I, look on fondly and things like that. But I think also there's a lot of pain there, and yeah, when it was just me, my brother, and my mom was very active at her church. She's from England, and so we went to. Well, when I was with her on the weekends, I wasn't with her very much, but when I was with her on the weekends, we would go to a Church of England, um, and which is Episcopal, much more liturgical and things like that. Which once you hit a certain age, you really rebel against, and you feel pretty, like I know you come from a Catholic background, and so there's just like
I rebel
there's some
too.
stuff in there where they're really not concerned about youth ministry or having fun or anything like that. So, I mean, I've grown to appreciate those more liturgical traditions and for different reasons. But yeah, at the when I was young, it wasn't something I was super into or really excited about. And then I was with my dad most weekends, so I never really went to church, to be honest. Yeah, there were times. So when my mom got remarried, my dad took it pretty personally and distanced himself from us, which was pretty awful, is
Mm.
not a great response for your dad. And yeah, I think in that season I started to feel really alone. That tight knit team that I had, started to drift away from me. I felt like My mom was no longer my mom. She was my stepdad's wife.
Mm.
Felt like me and my brother were kind of put in separate rooms to kind of create a new dynamic because me and my brother were so close. And so we really drifted because I was put with one of my stepbrothers, who ended up being the perpetrator of a lot of the abuse that I experienced and
Mm.
the quite a bit of bullying and things along those lines. Um, and so just it was a season of from when I was, 7, obviously it started then, but it was a slow progression. But, from then all the way until really high school, I felt pretty isolated and pretty alone. I had a very close knit group of friends in high school that helped me feel much more seen and cared for. And it was just a small group of like 3 other guys that I felt very connected to. But um, yeah, I think my early journey of faith was just, my mom had always talked about God, and there were times where we would read the Bible and do those sorts of things together. And I remember being, I don't know how, I must have been in middle school at some point, but just going out to this like corner of my neighborhood, and they have those like big electrical box. I don't know if they have them in Orange County, but where I grew up, they have these like big electrical boxes that sit kind of in on the sidewalk. And I just sat on one of those, and I just remember crying. Remember like
Mm.
sobbing and sobbing, asking God, like, what did I do? Like, why are you doing this to me? Like, I don't
Mm.
get this at all. I don't understand this. I don't understand why I have to live like this. And it was awful. It was awful. And
Yeah.
obviously in so many ways, the worst part of my life at
I
such a
could
young
just
age.
imagine, like, if I were driving by and seeing a junior high kid sitting on an electrical box sobbing.
Yeah.
That just that picture in my mind. Thank you for painting it because that saddens my heart to even
Yeah.
imagine, how broken you were that's where you needed that's where you went, right? And,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
I'm
saddens my
sorry.
heart too now. I mean, well, I've gone through so much healing. Obviously, there's so much more to my story.
Yeah.
But like I now am able to look back at that and feel very sad for young Drew, and
Mhm.
look on him with a lot of compassion and understanding and longing to protect him in the ways that he wasn't protected, to support him, encourage him,
Yeah.
bring about justice, all of those things that just weren't done for me,
Yeah.
and weren't that my parents needed to do that they didn't do. And I say this all in the context of I'm very forgiving, and it was a very difficult time for all of us in a lot of different ways. Um, but I do look on that scene in some ways being able to detach myself and say, wow, you didn't deserve that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, um, I think I lived in that place, and it was a very hard place to live, but you find all sorts of ways to cope as a young person. And, the resilience of young people is startling, but also
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that that stuff isn't going to bubble back up, in some way or another. And so anyway, I went through high school, had some very close friends in high school, and ended up getting invited by a girl that I had a crush on to church, which is, I feel like so many people have that story. And I went to church, nothing ever happened with the girl, but, like I just felt that was going into my junior year of high school. And it was a more evangelical style. So I think that appealed to me. And there was they had a youth group, lots of my, like friends. I would invite lots of my friends. There were people that became my friends that were there. And I was just really drawn to that, but more so drawn to Jesus. Like I felt, obviously coming out of an abusive situation, you carry so much shame and you don't even really understand why. You think it's because you're a bad person, or you're, not worthy, or because of the things you did and all this stuff. But really, it's the lies that the abuse ends up telling you over a long period of time. And I, I think it very much appealed to me for, this God that would love me no matter what, like that
Yes.
idea seemed like impossible because I hated me,
Mm.
and though it's this sad thing, it's like something that almost God used to draw me in and say, hey, I don't hate you. No matter
Mm.
what's gone on, what's happened to you, what's been done to you, what you've done, none of those things, I love you, and that, I don't know what
Powerful.
it was. It's hard to describe when you're describing your conversion experience, but just my heart felt touched.
Yeah.
My mind felt touched. Like I felt so engaged with this Jesus that would love me no matter what. And
Beautiful.
yeah, it was a really powerful time, and just really threw myself into youth group and that youth group, and loved my youth pastor and my youth leaders, and I would invite all my friends. I remember like my mom had an expedition back when every mom had either an expedition or like a Suburban, and we, because minivans had gone out of fashion or something, and so I would just take my mom's expedition and I'd go like to all my friends' houses and I'd pick them up and we'd pile in like. I mean, we were way deeper than there were even seatbelts, which I wouldn't do now. But back then, you think you're indestructible. So, just
Oh, to
all
be
these,
young.
yeah, right. And pile into the car, and I'd take everybody to youth group, and I became a leader in that youth group. Became a leader among my friends, and I think these were character qualities that were already a part of me, but hadn't really been awakened in this context, and so yeah, I had a lot of great conversations with my mom, as I mentioned, my youth leaders, but also like I had a friend's mom who just loved talking about God with me, and just felt like Jesus was discipling me, started that
Mm.
journey of discipleship with me through all these different channels and all these different ways. And I felt so compelled, inside, just to learn more, to know more. I like started just reading my Bible like crazy. And it's those times where it's like you're literally on fire. People use that
Yeah.
word because it's just like you feel so passionate about something, especially early on in our faith journeys. And I think
Yeah.
that's on purpose. I think God puts that spirit in us, um, so that we can make it through something that is probably otherwise pretty difficult. And to
Yes.
follow Jesus isn't an easy thing, but
That's right.
there's
That's right.
something about him that just is like, I have to, though. I have,
Right.
there's nothing else I want to do more than do that. And that's how I felt. I really remember feeling that way. And coming out of high school, out of those 2 years of following him and all he did in my life, I just was like, if I got to do anything, I'd probably want to do what my youth pastors do, like,
Mm.
because it's like, it seems like they get to hang out, mentor people, think about God, and they get to have fun, and they get to do fun things and play basketball with people. And yeah, so those are all the things that mattered to me at the time. And um yeah, so I started pursuing that. I left home when I was 18, never moved back. Just it was one of those unspoken things where I was just like, I'm never coming back.
I'm out
I'm
as quickly as I can.
exactly. And but I, was able to move in with my grandmother who lived out in Orange County. I grew up in Fontana, which is inland California. Moved in with my grandma out in Orange County because I didn't really have great college options or money to go to college, really. And so I went to Saddleback for a year, and
That's a junior college, right?
which is a junior college
Yeah.
in the Orange County area. And yeah, just I got connected with a church my aunt was going to, which is where me and Inez worked for years and years and years, and have been a
Which
part of for
clearly I didn't
years
know
and
where you
years.
work. Okay, folks, for the
Yeah.
record, Mariners Church is a really big church with a lot
It
of
is
staff.
huge. It's massive,
Yes,
massive. And me
right.
and Inez we
In
we
two
knew
different
each
channels.
other, but we were very different places. So it's, we know each other a lot better now than we did then.
Yes,
So
agreed, agreed.
um yeah, and so I got involved there with the youth group, just volunteering with some junior high students. My first, like, just with a small group. I was 18 and didn't know what I was doing at all, and that group fell apart. I think the last session, it was like these two kids like got in a fist fight, and I'm trying to
Oh,
like, and I
wait
I
a
was in
minute.
way over my head. And but yeah,
These
but
are
I was just
junior high kids.
junior high kids.
Junior high
Yeah,
kids.
that just and I'm
Okay, so I'm
I'm
curious.
like, yeah,
I'm
okay.
curious. You're on fire for Jesus. You're learning scripture. You're now on your own. You find a new church, and you start a group, and you're over your head. But I'm thinking you were believing this was going to work out a certain way, right?
Oh,
Because
didn't flinch at all. Like I just felt like, oh yeah, that was crazy. Like, but you just, that's the on fire nature of the
yeah.
new believer, right? It's that season of consolation. I tell people that it felt like God was trying to show me that life could be good again.
Hmm.
Like that life was worth living. Coming out of such a difficult situation, a difficult season of my life and as a child, and to go to a place where, one, they had a college group and I made all these friends, and then two, I could do what I was passionate about and
Yeah.
excited about and practice, and these people that wanted to trust their kids to me, which they probably shouldn't have done, and all that, but it was just like, I didn't flinch at all. Like I just was like, yeah, this is
Let's
what I'm
go.
gonna
And the
do.
next
Let's
thing you
do
know,
it.
two kids
Yeah.
are on the ground fighting. So
Right. And I'm like,
wait.
oh gosh, oh no, separate them. But yeah, it's the crazy wild stories of youth ministry. But
Yeah.
it was such a blessing of a season too, because I went from being a volunteer to being an intern, and then from being an intern to being paid staff, and all that in the course of about 4 years, across my college, time in college. And I was eventually able to, through a number of real huge blessings that I won't get into now, I was able to go to Vanguard, which is a local Christian school, study youth ministry, and it just
Awesome.
felt like this is what I wanted to do. And I really cared about people, cared about caring for people, and that sense of pastoral care, and loved students and loved caring for them in those ways. And so, yeah, I think just with all of that stuff, it yeah. I just felt like life was good in that season. Obviously there were difficulties and nothing was perfect, but that season of my life was just, I just remember it was such fondness and fun, and yeah,
It's an adventure. Sounded quite adventurous to be.
Yes.
I think those of you who pastor junior hires and high schools are adventure junkies, because
Oh yeah, saints.
you don't know what's going to
are.
happen, right? And there's some
Yeah.
tough issues that high schoolers deal with,
Oh my gosh.
especially
Yeah.
today. And so, yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think, yeah, I think in that season, it was a beautiful thing, and God was very good to me, and He's always good, but in a way that felt, there's this concept that I learned way later in life about, consolation versus desolation. These emotions that we receive in certain seasons for certain purposes, for God's purposes. And both, I think we can feel very drawn, especially coming out of that new believer season, to just the feelings of consolation. Wow, why don't I cry during worship anymore? Why don't I, feel this sense of, like just on fireness for God? And, I learned later that the answer is really that God's doing something different, you know, and He's changing and growing you in a new way, and that He wants you to learn to love Him, not just the emotions that He gives you, not just the good feelings that you get when you worship Him, follow Him, serve Him, and those emotions end up being deeper, right? I think both you
I'm
and I
glad that you
know.
brought that up. So tell me, unpack consolation, desolation in light of what you
Yeah.
just
So
said, just to be sure that those who are listening can track with us. And then I have a
yes,
question, a follow-up
totally.
question on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Consolation, desolation, the concepts come from St. John of the Cross. He's um, a old mystic, Catholic mystic. I mean, Catholic's probably misleading because back then there was just the church, but he's a saint within the Catholic canon, and he was one of what was called a desert father, somebody who would go out into the desert and think about God and do all sorts of weird stuff. And so, but from those desert fathers, a lot of really interesting thoughts and concepts and ideas about God and growth came out of that. And one of these things that he came up with was this idea of a dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul essentially is this season of life that is so difficult, so painful, but also so growing. It's not, difficult for no reason. That God is doing something unique in you, and that often we misinterpret dark nights of the soul. We think we're doing something wrong. Why do we feel this way? Our faith is wrong, all this stuff. But actually, what St. John of the Cross wants to say is that this is actually about what God's doing now, not what God used to do. And you've transitioned into a new season. It doesn't mean that you won't get back to a season of consolation. But there's a cyclical nature to our growth. And, we see this in every other place. I think if we think about physical growth, we think about even mental growth, we know that challenges, spur within us, a desire to grow. But for some reason in the spiritual life, we have bought the lie that it's just supposed to be all good. It's like, oh yeah, now that I'm following Jesus, I'm never supposed to have problems anymore. Which, if anybody ever said it that way, we'd be like, that's
You're
ridiculous.
crazy.
Like, you're
Why
crazy.
do you think that way?
But we think that way, right? We
Yes,
kind of do.
yes.
We're like, why is it going this way for me? I thought following Jesus was what I was supposed to do. Why would I get bad feelings? But it's like, yeah, there's lots of things that you're supposed to do that don't necessarily lead to instant gratification, I guess I should say. So working out is a perfect example, right? It's like, it's in the long run is going to make me feel better, to work out. But in the moment, it's horrible. And I hate working out. So it's like, if I'd rather shave my head than go for a run. But the idea is just really, that it's like, hey, yes, in that moment, it's difficult, and it starts more difficult than it ends. But as you push yourself, that you're going to feel better. You're going to have more stamina. You're going to be able to do more that you want to do, all these things. And so the idea with the spiritual life is that would be the same. And this is all stuff that I learned way later, than while I'm in this season of consolation. But looking back on my life, I think I can see it pretty clearly that God was like, oh, you need this.
Yeah. So consolation is that season of feeling that joy, that sort of maybe euphoric, right?
You can't even describe it fully. It's hard to describe, but those of us who have gone through it know it, right? We know what that's
like. The high.
We know what
it's the Christian high.
You're Christian high all the time, like it's the camp high, but it's the camp high all the time,
Yeah. And then desolation is the dark night of the soul. It's that low point that we think, and where many people leave churches, right? And they think, I'm having trouble with the worship or the teaching, or why am I not experiencing these feelings anymore? So something's wrong with them, or something's wrong with me. I've lost my connection with God, or maybe I never did believe, or maybe this isn't something that, maybe that was just a temporary thing. It's not really meant to be forever.
Or I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I'm just too sinful. Like if I had more faith, and I think what's difficult is a lot of our churches and church leaders they have a similar faith to us and a similar experience to us, and they don't really know what to do with that. They're just kind of, and I think a lot of us experience that. Like, we bring our difficult seasons to people who are supposed to be able to pastor and shepherd us through them. And I am, have been a pastor. I love pastors, but I think you can't take somewhere where you haven't been yourself. Right. And so a lot of our pastoral leadership within so many, particularly evangelical churches, struggle with this, having a blind spot in these places.
But don't you think also, Drew, that both of us having been pastors, the pastor who experiences a dark night of soul or desolation, or even gets to the edge of it, let's just say they don't even go that deep in it, but they're moving towards that direction, may not feel safe to allow themselves to go there.
Totally.
Right? Because they're pastors. They're not supposed to go there.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I be the pastor? And I'm having trouble. So therefore, then there's these coping mechanisms that we could easily create as pastors that hide that our souls are there. So then we don't really go there. And therefore, if we don't go there, we can't lead others through it.
Right. And that's exactly what we do, right? We're afraid of that dark night of the soul because this is our job all of a sudden. It's not just like, and for so many of us, I say us now, I'm not a pastor, vocationally now, but, in that season, it's like, this is my job. I don't have any other skills. Like I spent all my college doing this, all my young adult life doing this. If I can't do this anymore, then what am I doing? And there aren't necessarily these places for a pastor to go and say, you know what, I feel, held in this and that, and even normalizing the dark night of the soul and saying like, hey, actually this is something that is a sign of growth if you can lean into it, but we run from it, right? Because it's scary and it's hard. It's, it's terribly hard. And I don't mean to make light of it. When I moved into a more season of desolation, and then maybe that leads us back into my story. I'd been working at the church, and then a couple years in, my mom having been from England, I had a passport, and I just was kind of like, you know what, nothing's holding me back. I want to go on an adventure. I'm going to go live in England and live in London and just do it. Why not? I'd always wanted to, and I did, and it was hard as hell. Like it was like, not only was I was removing myself from this church that loved me and cared for me, and I was known and I was important, and I was, like surrounded with such good friends and mentors and people like that. And I just, plucked myself out and put myself in London. And all of a sudden I had none of that stuff. And, I felt very called to go to London, and I felt like God wanted me to go to London, but I think he wanted me to go so that I would remove some of those things, because what I felt in that season was God saying to me like, hey, look, I wanted to show you that life was good again, that life could be good, that you could live a life that was joyful, but we can't keep ignoring this stuff. These wounds in your heart are deep, and we cannot continue to ignore them. And in this context, that's what I think you're going to do. I guess
we're going to
maybe
dig
he didn't
into
say
these
think,
things
but he probably was
in
like,
London by yourself.
Right. And
Ooh.
so, obviously down the road of my time in London there, I made friends and I found purpose and things like that. But, it was more just like what that awakened in me. And for the first time ever, I told my mom about the abuse, what was going on, what had happened. I started telling, I had started dating who is now my wife, Marissa, and we were dating long distance. And I told her about that, which is very vulnerable.
Yes.
Particularly the kind of abuse I was sexually abused. And so it's like, there's so much just shame around this. And, the lies that we believe about how we can't tell anyone, or it makes us dirty, or it makes us weak, or not a man, or not a woman, like all these lies that we believe around it. But if you don't talk about those things, you never start to see, how like sometimes when you have a thought and then you say it out loud and you realize how silly it is, or how much a lie it is. And I guess it's kind of similar to that, like until I was able to talk to people about the abuse, I believed all sorts of lies about it because I was just in my head about it by myself, until people were able to say like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Oh my gosh, that's awful. I can't believe, and it's like in your head, you're like, I'm fine and I'm good, or, but deep down, I hate myself, and that's probably because of me and not because of this. But then for people to say, wow, it makes sense that you feel that much shame. That's a really hard thing to manage and deal with. And, wow, that must have been eating you up inside. How did you hold on to that for so long and never tell anyone? And all these things. And so, that season of desolation brought me tremendous freedom. And I'm down the road now, like seeing the benefit of the early seasons of jogging and my lungs are on fire sort of thing, but it's like now being in, and I'm nowhere near fully healed or anything. And certainly that was just the start of a journey that went through a lot of therapy, a lot of conversations with family, a lot of setting boundaries, healthy boundaries, so much, so much pain in my life, but also awakening, healing, So
That's
yeah,
beautiful. Drew, thank you for your vulnerability and
sure.
sharing. And
Yeah.
I just want to pause because if there's a listener who has experienced
Mm,
abuse or is experiencing abuse, um, I just think it's such an important thing what you just said.
mm,
The essentials of getting out of your head and sharing it with others. Obviously,
yeah,
careful choosing who those people
right.
are, but to hear someone speak back to you words
Mm,
of that was an injustice, that
yes.
was wrong.
Mm,
You did not deserve that.
right.
Um, that is so healing, and
Yeah.
it's right. And so if someone is trapped in an abusive situation right now, and
Yeah.
they need to hear those words, you can't. It's very hard to tell them to yourself and be convinced
Oh
of
my
that. You
gosh.
need
Yeah.
someone to help you, and so absolutely to look for someone to talk to and begin that journey
Right.
of speaking about it so that um, so those wounds can be healed. So I am so wow. I'm so glad God took you to England right,
Yeah. No,
to do that.
totally.
Like sometimes like I love that. I love that what you're saying to us is that the Lord was involved in revealing that injustice and
Mm,
bringing healing into your life.
yeah.
Which again, earlier we were talking about when we're in desolation, we're either blaming other people or blaming ourselves, but sometimes we blame
Hmm.
God,
Right.
right?
Totally.
And it's
Absolutely.
that's the other way to do it is we blame. Okay, something's wrong with God. And I was believing in the
Yeah.
wrong God, but in your
Where are
case,
you?
in your
You've left me.
desolation,
You told me you wouldn't leave me, and you've left me, is what it
right?
feels like. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in your desolation, were you experiencing that distance from God, or did that actually become a more deeper connection?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I certainly was, but I don't know if I would have ever admitted that because I was working in the church. Even in England, I was working in youth ministry. And so, I don't think I would have ever, I guess I didn't give myself room to say
Mm,
that, didn't give myself permission to say, oh God, you've left me. Oh God, I'm mad at you. But, I think later in that journey, when I actually realized that God's not afraid of my anger, God's not afraid of my 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 me being upset with him, I think that's when I felt so much more permission to say, like, you know what, God, what excuse me, I know I used hell earlier, I know certain people are offended, the cussing Christian, but where the hell were you when
yeah.
I was being abused?
Mm,
And it's not as though I've gotten this like really clear answer, but there was a season, and again, I don't want to ever fast forward through the growth that I've been
okay.
through. Like, I'm only in this place because of what that started when I went to England, and that was, we're talking about 2012. So I mean, over 10 years ago to where I am now, and it's been nonstop healing, and
Mm,
cycling through this rhythm of like, okay, coming up for air, breathe, breathe, breathe. Okay, we got to take a deeper dive again, and
mm.
I know you can't see it on the podcast, but I have an old professor that says spiritual growth goes like this. It's like a winding upward, so you're going in spirals, constantly recircling the
Up
same
and down,
drain.
back deeper, deeper,
Yeah,
deeper.
yeah, deep, and
Mm,
you're getting slowly closer to that center, that peace, that root. So anyway, all that to say, though, I think looking back on it now, it's, I was questioning, God, where were you? Like, how did you let that happen to me? And
mm,
I don't think I got this great answer. And but I did. There was a passage that really stood out to me that I had read years before and hadn't thought about in a long time. And then it came to me during a session of very intentional healing prayer that I was doing with a group of people. And it's this whole thing that I don't need to describe here, but one of the verse that came to me was about Noah and how God regretted creating humanity because of the pain that it caused, and that word regret was really hard, and that God regretted that had to happen to me, or that
mm.
did happen to me, I should say. And I don't necessarily have super theological clarity, and both you and I are very, like, we've spent a lot of time thinking and being in school for theology, but I think there is a word of encouragement there for me that is not what God desires or desired for me, that abuse isn't this like, I don't know, sometimes it's like it's all part of God's plan, and it's like I think there's a difference between God being able to work with it and create
So
restoration
good.
from it
Right? Redeem
than
it,
than it
make it
right,
something good out of it. Yes.
totally, than it being
Thank you.
part of the plan.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I felt that encouragement within my heart that it's like that was never part of the plan,
Yeah.
but from it we're going to bring something so good that people won't be able to deny me, and that's sort of, and that's what he does with all of us, right?
Yeah.
Looking at our stories of hurt, of pain, where we've sinned, we've been sinned against. And maybe this goes into our chapter a little bit, but um I think, but he is able to redeem,
Yeah.
and he is a redeemer God, a healing God, and our Lord is able and powerful, and he is working all things together for the good of those who love him. And if it's not, I had a pastor used to say this, but if it's not good, it's not done.
Yeah.
And that's always hard in the moment. Like that's hard for me even now when I've got my own, there's struggles, there's anxieties, there's these things, and it's just like, okay, but God's not done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I compare where I was to where I am now, I can see God moving me along that axis of this slow, the slowest. Another professor used to say it's spiritual growth is the slowest. Oh, what did he used to say? This, the slowest motion on earth or something like that. Like it's imperceivable in so many ways, especially when you're in it. But when you look over it across 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you start to see, wow, who I was then, like, like that transformation that God has placed within me and has brought me along. And wow, I mean, I feel so far from being done, like, and so far from being finished, but, Christ is, God is
It's
faithful
working.
to complete the good work that he started in us. And,
Wow.
that'll happen, the other side of eternity. But, like, I think there is still access to that for us now, that, in that we get to move closer and closer to the life of the full that Jesus promises, right?
Yeah.
And living into that. So,
I love that. This is so good because obviously, Drew, we've been working together. Has it been a year now, would you say? At
yeah, yeah,
least.
last summer, I think.
It
Yeah. So,
was. Yeah.
yeah.
And so, folks, Drew did the theological review of my book. So, writing on matters of faith, writing on the Bible, and obviously, there's mistakes you can make in the way that you present the information, and intentionally or unintentionally, right? Some people will have a bent, and I wanted someone
Sure.
to look over my shoulder and push back if I said anything that didn't seem theologically sound, and or inconsistent. Maybe I said one thing in one
Hmm.
part of the book and a different, presented God differently or scripture differently anywhere else. And so Drew was there to help me with that, and maybe even think of scripture that I didn't think of, et cetera. And which, by the way, I am so grateful. It's something you do didn't not only with my book, but you do that still with
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
all the content we create on Trochia and Ines Franklin. So really, really grateful for you. But I did not know your story.
Mm,
Knowing your story now, I'm even more just heartwarmed the fact that we're working
mm,
together, because the book Uncharted is about this idea that, we think the journey is going to go one way, and somewhere along the line we find ourselves going, whoa, this is not what I expected. Why are things happening the way they're
yeah.
happening, right? And we go through if it's not fully the dark night of the soul, we certainly go through seasons where we start to
Right.
question ourselves, others, or God.
Totally.
And I wanted to normalize that and show that this is a human experience. It's biblical. There's many characters in the Bible who go through this.
Hmm.
And there's actually something incredibly beautiful that God does in all of those moments, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. And that we can trust this journey, even if it's going to be rather unknown to us, right? Like we
Right.
might think we're in a really Christian high, everything's awesome, I got great community, and we think this is going to be forever, and then something happens and
Right.
everything changes, and all of a sudden we think, oh, wait, did I believe something that was a lie, right?
Mm,
And I want
mm,
people not to have that feeling and go, okay, God,
right.
what are you going to teach me here? Where am I going to learn now? Because things have changed and
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling very disoriented and I don't know what
Right.
this is going to look like, but I know you haven't left me. And, my
Right.
passage for the book is the Deuteronomy 31, verse 8,
Mm.
where God tells Moses to tell the people, to tell Joshua, I will never leave you or forsake you. I'm the one that goes before you. Do not be
Mm-hmm.
afraid or discouraged. I did not quote that perfectly,
Right.
but all those words are in that passage. Go look
No.
it up.
And if you look at the context of that passage and where it exists in Israel's story, they're in the desert. This is a waiting
Yes.
period, a refining period. Those 40 years in the desert are brutal for them. Like 40 years,
Yeah.
think about that. Like this, we've, read it over the course of, a few chapters in scripture. But I mean, 40 years is most of your life for most people, especially people back then. Well, I guess people
Yes.
back then were living really long, but
Yeah.
like that's a long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what God did in that time was so necessary though for Israel's story, and their journey towards in so many ways unlearning
Yeah.
the
Egypt.
the slavery, that
Yeah.
they had been in, and relearning what it meant to be free people of God, you
I
know.
love that. And in a way, these past decade that you've been healing is this unlearning of the
Mm,
lies that um, either people spoke over you or the enemy spoke over you or the
right.
circumstances spoke over you and
Mm.
relearning the truth. And that is not a quick process, right?
Oh, no.
That takes,
I'm still in the
wow.
middle of it. So if anybody
So
figures it out, let me know.
So good. Well, Drew, thank you. We're going to have another conversation on Uncharted. That's just
Great.
we
Yeah,
we
no,
are
it's
we've
fun. I
gone.
mean,
This has
yeah, we
been
didn't
this
really
has
get
been
to the book too
amazing,
much, but
and we wanted to talk more about the book. But I feel like what you shared was so in line with the book, and I want to
mm,
close with this last piece, and that is. I shared with you, I wanted to talk about the theology of the book because we're
right.
saying something about God in this whole,
Yeah.
which your story to me is an
Mm,
example. I feel like it kind of parallels what the book is trying to say, right?
yeah.
Um, and so I wondered if you could share some thoughts from your heart about what is the theology behind this idea of an uncharted journey of faith.
Yeah.
What is the theology you've seen? And theology means the study of God. What do we know about God when we look back at our stories and
Right.
see like how incredibly messy they can be and
Mm,
windy and not the way we thought they would work out.
right.
What word I'm looking for, but unstructured maybe, or
Yeah.
non-linear. Come on, you're better at English than
Nonlinear is
me.
a great way to put it. Well, I'd say even just more so what resonates with me is that there's no cookie cutter solutions that
Mm,
we try to create, I think that are inadvertently, I think they're well intended, but inadvertently based in control,
mm,
which is a huge theme in your book, a desire to control our spiritual lives, a desire to control our faith, and a desire to control how God operates in our
yeah,
lives and brings about the good. And God isn't necessarily interested in what we would think is best, and no, this is how they did it, so why isn't it? But he actually has that level of unchartedness. It's funny sometimes when I'm thinking about I also, since this point, have taken extensive more schooling, and I'm working on a doctorate in theological things and
woohoo,
discipleship in particular. And one of the things that is really interesting to me about discipleship is that sometimes we think discipleship is to one another, but really it's to Jesus. And the
mm,
reason for that is that when we disciple to one another, we tend to try to create all these solutions that are like very like, how can I disciple somebody through just a book or through just a program or through just a curriculum? And Jesus says, well, that can be a piece of how I disciple you, but you are too unique for that, really.
mm,
At the end of the day, your journey is too unique. And if you look at the curriculum, in quotes, that Jesus put me through, we can't send everybody to England on this,
yeah,
soul searching journey, nor do we need to. That
right,
was what I needed. And when I was in tune with what Jesus was calling me to in a season of life, whether I knew why or not, and I took that step of faith, he brought about a personalized relationship curriculum, if you will, that would only work on me in my unique place, in my unique journey with my unique story. And I think the theology of it is that when we try to create all these things, Jesus actually gave us the church. When we try to create all these things, Jesus sent the Holy Spirit. Like when we try to create all these things, God gave us his word.
Yeah.
And I think, not to oversimplify it, but if we are in godly community that's leading us closer to him, if we are in tune with his spirit, following his steps so that he can personally disciple us, and if we are in line with his word and we can check on, the truths that we are being revealed within us, then I think there's so much there for us if we open to it. And it isn't to put down any book, any curriculum, anything like that. It's just to say, let's recognize it for what it is. It can be a means of Jesus's discipleship, but it can't replace Jesus's discipleship.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's always spoken to me about your book since you first told me about the idea, is that all of us are on an uncharted journey of our faith. And nobody, there's things we can learn, there's people we can glean from, there's guides we can have, but nobody's going to know it exactly how it's going to work out. And things aren't going to go the way that you always expect them to. And God's going to take you to places that are scary, that are difficult, that are hard, but also that are amazing, far more amazing than what you could dream up for yourself. And I think that's the theology. I don't know if that's theology or what, but whatever, that's the intersection that I see within your book and within the Word of God, is that it's giving us permission to glean from wisdom while not saying, here's the only way to go. Here's how you do it, step by step, cookie cutter by cookie cutter. And then you do offer steps in your book, but the steps are like, learn to listen to the Holy Spirit.
Postures. Yeah, postures
learn
before the Lord.
Obedience.
Yeah.
Learn, to offer your difficulties to God. So they're general spaces that can apply to everyone, but within the context of your unique journey. It would be like, it's like handing somebody a compass rather than a map, or having a guide walk with them rather than a map, because it's like the compass can be taken anywhere and utilized to our benefit anywhere. A map is a specific area that tells me I have to go a specific way. So if we could use those analogies, I know we use all sorts of map analogies in the book and stuff, so
and
don't get too mixed up with it.
Yeah, we do use lots of them. But I love what you just said. It's a great place to end. And that is that ultimately, all the quotes, solutions are not the right word, because I don't offer any solutions in my book at all. But all of the offerings in the book are intended to point us to Jesus, point us to God. So it's these turn, right? Constantly like turn to God, turn to God, turn to God. And that posture is what makes you take your eyes away from someone else's journey. You take your eyes away from just looking at your own circumstances. You look up to God, and through his eyes, the whole thing looks different. And so, that's the whole point of the book, is to focus on Jesus, connect with him, connect with the Holy Spirit, connect with his word, connect with the beautiful stories of people who are doing the same, and then watch as God does what only he can do.
It's good.
Yeah, that's a good way to end. We're going to end it right there, Drew.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks,
Thank
Inés.
you so much. And like I said, we're going to have you back because there's more we want to talk about.
Yeah, so. I love this stuff. I love talking about this stuff. Obviously, it just kind of comes out of me. So, now my wife is tired of hearing about it, so I can send my thoughts about things here. So
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Totally.
Thank you for listening to Uncharted Podcast with Inés Franklin. Learn more about Inés at unchartedpod.com. Follow Inés' journey on Instagram at Inés Franklin. Sign up for our email list to receive direct access to online experiences and more. Thanks for listening, and join us again next time.